Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our webinar this evening entitled Set Up and Governance for Social Enterprise. So we at ISBC are absolutely delighted in our partnership with Innovate Communities in Dublin to bring this event to you this evening. And we intend to explore setup and governance for social enterprise. And while this topic and area can be quite complex, I'm sure that it'll be much clearer by the time our two speakers have finished. So I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to Diarmuid O'Carboy, the CEO of Carmichael Centre, and our own Eamon Ryan of ISBC. Now, before I hand over to our first speaker, Diarmuid, if I might just bring all your attention to the chat button at the bottom of your screen, or the question and answers button. And please submit any comments or any questions along the way. Please feel free to submit your questions as the speakers are talking, or as the question comes to you, or and our intention then is after each speaker we will address some of the questions, and at the end of both presentations we will be opening a panel discussion. And at this point you're quite free and welcome, and we'd be delighted if anyone would like to join us in person or by voice and ask questions directly, and we will proceed along those lines. So thanks again for joining, and I'm delighted to hand over now to Diarmuid, who is the CEO of Carmichael Centre in Dublin. Thanks, Diarmuid, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Rita, and welcome everybody. As Rita says, I'm the CEO of Carmichael, and those who don't know Carmichael, we are a support organisation for non-profits, and this year is our 30th year. We were originally set up as a service hub and accommodation hub, and over the years we've expanded quite a bit into the whole area of training, consultancy and guidance to non-profits all over Ireland. And we do quite a lot in the whole area of governance. When you think about governance, is how an organisation is run and managed is critical to any organisation, no matter what sectors you're in, that you have good governance systems in place. And what I want to talk tonight is about some of the things you need to think about, particularly as if you're at an early stage in setting up your social enterprise or your business, because things you need to think about may not need to be put in now, but they need to be thought about and consider when you might need to put them in, because decisions you take in the early stages could hamstring you a little bit. If you've gone down particular routes, you may find it difficult to change. So we'll go into that more detail. I'll be welcoming the questions, because this is quite a complex area, and it's unique to a lot of, it's a decision. If you are the founding person, there's a lot of decisions you need to be taking at this stage, and this is one of them. And you need to tease it out of what's going to be right for you, what's the best approach to take, and how you see your social enterprise evolving over a period of time. So that's sort of things we will cover. I'll cover some of the options that you have, but I think particularly in the questions you'll ask and in the panel discussion, we can maybe ask some of your specific questions, what things you need to consider. I'm going to share, I'm only going to use a few slides just to provide some of the context. So I'm going to go into slide share now. And if I can, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So you're at an early stage in your social enterprise. So obviously you've seen an opportunity, or you've seen an unmet need, or a social need that's not being served or adequately served currently, and you have an idea, or you have a drive to do something about it. So you're looking to get started, and you're trying to get things done. And one of the first things you'll probably be told, you need a plan. And that's true, you need to have a business plan about understanding who you're going to serve, what your model is going to be, what kind of services, but also understand your regulatory environment in which you're going to operate. So if you're going to do, for example, Meals on Wheels, there's a number of regulations that you need to understand about health and safety, food standards. there's also things about if you're going into people's homes and be guard vetting. So again, thinking about your business and where you're going to operate is very important, but also thinking how you're going to govern. So thinking ahead and say, well, next year, 3 years, 5 years, where do I think this enterprise is going to be? What kind of governance systems do I need to start planning for now and start putting them in as appropriate as the business grows? So, regardless of whether you're in social enterprise or private sector, there are a number of options open to you when you're setting up a business opportunity. The most common form for a lot of people is they're sole traders. They conduct the business themselves. So you're an electrician, or you're a news agent, or you're a hairdresser. You set up as a sole trader, and you're responsible for the business. You may hire 1 or 2 people, but generally you control the business. You're a sole trader. So that's the sort of more common form. In the non-profit area, you may come together to do something in your community, and one of the common ways for small groups is the unincorporated association, and that is it provides a basic structure where you may set up the rules of who does what and what you're about, and you operate. You're unincorporated, so it tends to be small voluntary groups that would come together in a local community to do something together as a group. As you get more complex and as things get more complex, you may need to look at the whole area of limited liability, and that is to protect you from being personally liable for something that if things go wrong. So you have 2 sort of main options. You go private or you go company limited by guarantee. And the private limited company is if you keep the ownership of the enterprise in private hands, and it would be you and maybe 1 or 2 other shareholders would own the company, and you get the legal legal status as an entity that can enter contracts that if people are being sued for breach of contract, it's the company that's been sued rather than yourself personally. So again, if you're providing services and there's a risk that the people might sue you for damages, a lot of people said, I need to get limited liability in place. So private limited company would be one of the first ones to look at. If you are purely solely in the social space and your enterprise is a social enterprise serving a social need and has a social purpose, the common form for non-profits that are that take a company structure is company limited by guarantee, and it's a particular legal structure where there isn't actually owner. It's controlled by members, but there's no ownership per se. It's a member-driven organization. It gives you that legal identity. Other options that you can look at is going down the cooperative route. This is probably more familiar with some of the agricultural food co-ops would be the one most prevalent. But if you look in a lot of European countries, social businesses tend to go down the cooperative route rather than, say, the limited liability route. We've seen some cooperatives established in Ireland in recent years, but it's still very, very few. It's difficult, time-consuming because you need to get registered, and that process, particularly for smaller co-ops, is not easy to go through. On the private side, you have options like unlimited companies. Like if you're Larry Goodman and you want to keep all your stuff private and you don't want to reveal how much profit you're making, you can go the unlimited company status. The disadvantage of going unlimited is that if there is actions taken against the company or it's been wound up, you are personally liable. You don't get the benefit of the liability, limited liability. Under the Companies Act of 2004, they brought in some new structures, and a designated activity company is one that was created you'll see a lot of financial services companies will have the DAC after them. So that's a designated activity. It's one with a particular specific purpose that they're engaged in. And then at the top of the tree in terms of scale of company structures is the public limited company. But those are the ones that would offer shares to the public and are listed on a stock exchange. So you may have dreams that you may become a public limited company in time, but it's a very, very small minority of companies in Ireland tiny percentage of companies in Ireland would be public and limited companies. So, so they're big, your CRHs and your Smurfit Kappa. That's the type of companies that have the PLCs. The most common form of company in Ireland would be the private limited company, and then you would have the company limited by guarantee would have over about 12,000 companies limited by guarantee. I have the charity over there, and that's a particular type of structure that you might be considered, that you may say, well, I want to become a registered charity. That may be a requirement, and this was part of the thing of thinking ahead where you want to end up. If you are going to providing services that the state is going to purchase, because you're serving a particular group of people, and that the state will be your primary purchaser or funder of those services, they tend to want you to have charitable status before they will give you funding. You need to have a clear charitable purpose if you're going to get registered for a charity, but it's a particular structure. There are over 10,000 charities currently in Ireland. About 1,500 of them would be actually boards of management of school, and there would, all sorts of organizations have charitable status that you'd be surprised with, but that's because there's 4 charitable purposes. There's you need to have a clear chart under the Act of 2009. You must either your purpose may be advancing education, advancing religion, the relief of poverty and economic hardship, and the 4th one, it must have a clear public benefit. So those are the 4 things that you need to say, which things would you fit into to get charitable status? Because if you don't meet any of those 4, that's the first primary test. And if you think, yes, I do meet those, then you will go through a process of looking for registration with the Charity Regulatory Authority. And it is a relatively complex process. So thinking about your legal form is important at this stage, because if you see yourself eventually becoming a charity, you need to make decisions now that over the stage of your development, when will you be ready to apply for charitable status, and what sorts of things you need to put in place. So again, you may not need to do it today, but you need to have some sort of plan of where you see your business going and thinking about the structure. If you're at very much at the startup stage of your and you're getting your ideas together, I would say sole trader status for the moment. Just keep it simple till you have a clearer clarity around what your business is, what it's going to be, how big it's going to come over the period of time. So do your business planning, then think about which sort of structure do you want to become, a private limited company or a company limited by guarantee? And then if you become a company limited by guarantee, do you also want to go the whole hog and become a charitable organization as well? So they are important things to think about, because they have implications over the ownership and control of the organization that you need to think about. Because suddenly if you're the founder and driver of a particular social enterprise, and suddenly think, oh, if I become a charitable status, what do I become within that organization, that governance structure? Because it can be very different from what you can imagine. And I'll just go into that now in my next slide. Is thinking of the structure you take will depend on what regulatory regime you will come under. So if you are a company, so whether you're a private limited company or a company limited by guarantee, you will come under the remit of the company's registration office, and you'll have to register with the company's office. If you become a company, you'll also come under the remit of the Office of Director of Corporate Enforcement. And then if you're want to become a charity, you will need to get charitable status from the charity regulator, and from that you then get tax exempt status as a charity from the revenue. So usually the processes now has been streamlined. You go to the regulator first, get approved, and then you apply for your tax exemption status. There's still 2 different steps in the process. Revenue usually will then, if you've been approved for a charity regulator, then it's a sort of almost like a tick box from revenue to give you the revenue tax exempt status. So thinking about where you end up is important, and what you think your social enterprise is going to evolve into. The problem in Ireland is that a lot of social enterprises don't fit neatly into those available legal structures. A lot of them says, we're not a charity and we don't want to be a charity, so they have to go down the company limited by guarantee route, and that can have implications in terms of that, the ownership is you can't have payments going out to people outside of the things that like in investors. So in UK, they have a structure called a community interest company, which allows people to get taken outside investors to come in as shareholders in the company and get a return. So we don't have that ideal legal structure in Ireland. So you have to compromise and say, do I stay company limited by guarantee, or do I go company limited guarantee plus a charity? So when you're thinking about it, there's a few things you need to think about is where are you going to get the funding for your enterprise, and over time, where is that funding going to come from? Because that may have implications on the structure that you have. So if you go private limited company, you may find yourself excluded from certain funding streams from the state because they may not fund you, but not necessarily totally excluded, but it will have implications. A certain funding are available to non-profits or charitable organizations won't be available to private companies. You need to think about, well, what happens to your profits or your surplus that you generate? Do you want to reinvest them back in the business, or do you want to be able to pay that out in dividends or in payments to the backers of the organization? So think about where when you start getting to the stage of where you're generating surpluses, do you want to treat those as profits, or is it money that gets reinvested back in it? The other thing is about thinking about is about yourself. Where do you see yourself ending up in the structure? Is this something that you want to generate a livelihood from? That that this is going to be a job, and as you see the enterprise grow, that you will be a paid employee in that, because that will implicate the structure. Because once you become a charity, for instance, you will need there's a clear separation between the paid staff and the board. And the board in a charity are volunteers; they can't be paid. And you can't be a chief executive and be a board member of a charity. So if you see yourself as the driver and the controller going down the charitable status, you're going to have to cede control and direction and ownership to the board, who may have different views about where the organization is going and where it needs to go. And so that can be difficult for a lot of the founders of enterprises, that suddenly they're the driving force that have brought the organization along and have gone down the charitable status route and suddenly realize that they are curtailed in their power, and they are now reporting into a board that may not have the same passion that they had. So if you want to get paid and become a charity, you can't be on the board. You also need to think about where you're going to get money if you're going to bring investors, because your legal structure can have implications in terms of what you can do in terms of paying your investors their money back. So that's why I think is that when you're looking at the early stage of thinking about where your social enterprise is and what your business plans, it's also important to think about what legal structure you're going to end up in and when you're going to end up in that structure, and ask yourself a number of questions of where is the control going to lie. If I'm the founder, where do I want to still remain in control of that organization? And that will limit your choices in certain areas in terms of the legal structure that you can take. Okay, that's me in terms of giving you a quick overview of some of the considerations on the legal structures for a startup social enterprise. I'm going to hand back to Rita now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dermot, for that. Now, just while Dermot was talking, one or two questions popped in. So firstly, there was a question generally about the slides. So yeah, we'll be delighted to forward the both presentations, the slides of both presentations on via email after the event. And just one more question there, Dermot, if you might, just for me, Dale, asking, do I need professional advice to set up a charity?
This is a tricky one. You do need to get some advice. There is some guidance on the charity regulator website about setting up a charity. Most people are reluctant to get involved because a lot of ideas never get beyond the sort of the idea stage and form a full get to charitable status. Going through the charitable status, you need to understand what the requirements of the charity regulator, and they have detailed guidance on it, and that would be the first thing I would look at. They will look at very quickly. They say, who are the trustees of your charity? What kind of background have they? Are they happy that this is a viable entity, that you have sort of some proof of concept that this is something that will work, and that you have the wherewithal in terms of a team around you to make it work in terms of the trustees and a plan for delivering on it. So there are some people who can give you advice. You know, it's one that there are guidelines and tips to think about, but the charity regulator website is very, very helpful, and that would be my first protocol. If I was thinking of, I'd look at that, download the guidance, try and understand that, and then maybe try and ask a few people. Sometimes if you go to accountants, they may not be very familiar with the charitable status, so it's an area they may not all that. They'll know very well about setting up a private company, and I've heard of people that have gone to the accountants saying want to set up a charity, and they've ended up that they've been set up as a private limited company, and suddenly that sort of, they have to unwind all of that if they want to go down the charitable status, which you cannot be a private limited company and get charitable status. So again, looking for where you're going to get advice, you need to know somebody that knows that has some experience of it. It is a gap in the market in terms of helping people to go through it, because it could take up to 12 months to get through the charity regulator process. Because you send in your application and they'll have queries for more information, and you're waiting to come back. One of the things you will need in going for charity status, you need the constitution. So you need to pull that together. So yes, there are a few things that you will need a bit of help on, but as I say, have a look at the charity regulator's website.
Lovely, thanks, Dermot. Now, keep your questions coming in, and we will address them in a little bit more detail after our second presentation, where we'll be opening up a panel discussion. So keep them coming, and we'll get to them in due course. So thanks again, Dermot, for that. Now, our second speaker this evening is Eamon Ryan, and Eamon is of ISBC. He's the co-founder and is the CEO of ISBC. And so this evening, Eamon is going to share some of his insights from many of the interactions and the encounters with various social enterprises over time, and I suppose the benefits that derive from effectively addressing the setup and governance from the outset. So welcome, Eamon, and thanks a million for being here.
Thank you, Breda. And what I'm hoping, I'll just share my screen here. And what I'm hoping to do in this piece is build on from what Dermot has talked about. As you can see, there's lots of different choices that you can actually make. So what I actually want to try and do in this part is give you some idea of how to guide yourself through that journey so that you get to the right place. So if I could start, and I just want to mention both of these actually are past participants from our incubator program. Slanu Stroke Rehab, its focus is on better life quality post-stroke. It's developed a unique program geared around upper limb rehabilitation so that you get the use of your arms, which is a huge difference in the quality of life post-stroke. Another participant on that program was WePlay.ie. Its focus is on encouraging children to embrace physical activity so that they get the lifelong benefits of that, targeting those, in particular, those children who are not naturally sporty, but to engage them through a sense of fun in terms that will sort of stick with them through the rest of their life, and so that they get the benefits from that. Slanu Stroke Rehab is a CLG with charity status. WePlay.ie is a limited company. Both are social enterprises to their core. And as Dermot said, one of the issues in Ireland, there is no legal connection. There is no legal definition of a social enterprise. And it can take any form, as you can see from the extremes that Dermot talked about there, from a CLG at the charity end all the way up to a limited company. Both have chosen quite different approaches, and they're reflective of their different journeys. And that's actually a key point, as Dermot said. that where you're trying to figure out is the in place you're going to. So don't necessarily be in such a rush to get that answer at the beginning, because there are signposts and things along the way that can actually influence which way you will go. And sometimes when people talk about particularly a limited company in the social enterprise space, they kind of say, well, that can't be true. They're for profit. Why would that be a social enterprise? And the fundamental thing about a social enterprise, it's about impact. The motivating, the driving force behind the entity, whether it be a CLG or whether it be a limited company or an individual, is they're trying to achieve impact. If the impact dominates over the financial return, that actually is a social enterprise. So the starting point always should be understanding the impact that you are trying to achieve. And if you combine that with two other things, if you combine it with the personal why is it that that impact matters to you? Why are you involved in this space? Do you need to earn a living from this space? Or are you simply concerned with the cause itself? All these are legitimate questions. They're part of why you're involved with. That's your personal motivation that has connected you into this world. And the last part is the values that you personally uphold. And it's not that you're trying to just achieve the impact. You want to achieve it in an impact in a way that's aligned to your values. And our starting point in almost everything we do is we call this your purpose. If you as an individual, as a founder of a social enterprise or an emerging social enterprise, if you're clear on the impact, your personal motivation and the values you want to instill in how you do the whole thing, that's your purpose. That's your anchor point as you go through all the confusion that will follow from there. It's the anchor reference point that helps you understand where you're actually going. And our fundamental belief is that structure should follow from purpose. You start with purpose, and if you understand that and follow a trail from there, you can actually figure out the right fit for you in the context that best suits you. If I now switch completely to the other side, when you actually get the thing established, when you're a few years down the road, what's actually there? And the strange thing is there's three entities in a social enterprise at that moment in time, and they're actually separate. You have the board itself that will have created and is responsible for the direction of the enterprise. You as the founder, at this stage as a founder, you could be on the board, you could be actually working as a paid employee within the social enterprise, you could be a CEO. Again, all of those, as Jeremy said earlier, are influenced in terms of what structure you want. But you are there as the founder, as an entity in its own right. And the strangest thing that people try to struggle sometimes to get their hand around is the separation that has to come from you, the founder, to the enterprise that you're trying to create. And I can speak this personally, that the challenge in doing this, that when you start off, it is what you're doing as the founders trying to actually make it happen. And in order to make it a sustainable entity in time, it has to evolve into an enterprise. And the enterprise is not you, it's another entity. So eventually the end state, when you get to wherever that place is, you have these three parties, and the relationships that work between them are the actual key to the whole thing. When you actually, one of the other questions we often get asked is, when should you form a board? And again, we say, don't necessarily rush to form a board, because if you rush to form a board too early, what you will end up doing is you will try and persuade people that you can get to go on the board, right? And that actually has some negative effects down the road. However, there's a very clear point at which you definitely would want to have a board in place. And that is where external money has become part of the story. At that stage, you, as the person, as the founder, actually need to have that in place for your personal protection. It's almost like without that, it's open to misinterpretation. So the idea of having a board in place at that moment in time, part of the reason that you need it is not only for what they're contributing, which is their primary job in terms of the development and of the social enterprise, but you personally need it to actually protect you so that the integrity of where you're going is obvious to the world. And in selecting those board members, the important thing is to actually see them as individuals. They don't, and in fact, if you go for all the same type, it's not actually that healthy. And what do you want in those individuals? The first thing that they have to do is they have to share your purpose. If they don't share your purpose, then you have to sort of say, okay, why are they really involved in this? Do their skill sets benefit that purpose? Are they bringing something that you don't have that augments what you're doing already? What are their expectations? Okay, at the end of the day, people could get involved from a career development point of view. They could get involved from a genuine, absolute interest in the cause. They just might want to put a certain amount of time into the thing. All of these are perfectly valid reasons for getting involved. And all of these can be motivations for board members that are actually good board members. But it is important that you understand what's been offered and what the experience is going to give them. If that's in balance, they're actually probably a good match. And the last thing is we're all humans and people have to work together. There is chemistry that exists between different people. Okay, and at the end of the day, you are going to be interconnecting with the board members. Okay, so is how can you see that actually happening? And one of the things we'd often say to people is in the early stages, before you actually form the board, start seeking out people that you think would actually fit this criteria, is how it develops. They can be either mentors, they can be advisors, they can be someone you just have a chat over a coffee about the thing. You can actually, in some cases, you can set up advisory committees. An advisory committee has no legal foundation whatever, but is a very good way of getting people to contribute their skills. And in doing that, you will understand more about your working relationship with them. You'll understand more about the connection that they will have to the endeavor that you're on and what the working relationship will be with them. And it is about effective relationships, and effective relationships come down to three things, which is easy right and extremely difficult to get right. The first one and the fundamental is shared common purpose. If you're not actually articulating the same common purpose, confusion emanates from there. So it's critical that that is there. You could actually have a board that dislikes each other personally, and I have seen this in practice, but where they share the same common purpose, okay, that can actually be converted into constructive tension that actually advances things. A set of board members that love each other and actually love working together and don't have a shared, clear, common purpose actually is of no use to you, strangely enough. Second thing is that mutually understood clear roles. An awful lot of the issues, as I'll hopefully give you a few examples in a while that emerge, can be from a misunderstanding as who's responsible for what. And in those gaps, confusion reigns. This gets misinterpretation through perception. And again, dysfunction starts creeping in. And the last part is real communication. And real communication, as we'll see in a while, is about understanding. It's not about broadcasting. So if we were just briefly to go through these shared common purpose with each of the individual board members, it comes down to two things, the values and impact. They must share the values that you have and they must share the impact you're trying to do. What's not on that, all right, is the personal motivation for participation. That doesn't have to be shared. It can be quite common, and you'll see it in a lot of boards, where some people, particularly if they are from a particular professional background, their profile might say that they should have an involvement in social enterprise type activity, so they will contribute for a number of years onto a board. Their motivation can be as simple as that. There is nothing wrong at all with that motivation. All right, perfectly. They are given their skills in return for a return that comes to them, which comes in terms of their profile. Right? They do not have to have the same sense of motivation as yourself. But what they do have to do is share the same values. So for example, to illustrate this, we worked with one organization that actually got funding, got a large scale funding that they took, and obviously reformed the board from that. It was a therapy system that was a combination of an online and an offline program. Obviously, if you're investing and you're trying to recover from that, the easiest part to scale is online and not the offline. The founder of the entity actually was very much in their value set of the belief that if you do not combine the offline with the online, the therapy does not perform as well. So you ended up with a board that was actually trying to accelerate an online thing, and the founder who fundamentally disagreed that the online thing on its own wouldn't work. You have a fundamental clash of values that's coming on there, and it won't surprise you to learn it didn't actually end well. And actually that thing about values is actually a huge thing which comes to bear in funding, particularly in the social enterprise space. And I'll touch on that briefly later on. And I'll be perfectly honest, where there's a clash of value, it's the one problem we've never actually figured out a way of fixing. Okay, it's really try not to go there, because that actually causes confusion. And in terms of desired impact, that can also be a source of confusion if it's misunderstood. You can have people that actually have set up an entity and they're in a region and they want to deal with their immediate communities. And we would see this quite common actually. It's usually the way people start. You then could have a board, and there could be board members that have the view that they want that program to be rolled out into a national program. On the other hand, the person that founded it, they're doing it motivated by the community. So fundamentally in that, you have a tug of war that will develop, okay? You can manage that situation sensibly if people are aware the tug of war exists. But if they're not aware of it, then it becomes really, really negative. So desired impact, clarity around that, you can resolve it if you can see it early. And I've already mentioned the last point here. Motivations are personal, as long as they're consistent in terms of the values and impact that you're sharing. No issue with the fact that people do it for different reasons. We're all different people. In terms of mutually understood rules, if you as the founder, and I've taken this way of going through this presentation, and the board, there's responsibilities and expectations on both sides, right? And in terms of avoiding clashes in this, the more you can make it explicit, the better it actually is, because it stops the gray areas that actually cause complete confusion. And what we're talking about in these things is people talk in terms of the authority. What authority does either role have between the board and the person that's founded or is the manager of the entity? Accountability, who are they accountable to, and what are the broad areas of responsibility? Skills and competencies, what value each person adds to the enterprise, and the benefits, the reward and recognition. And it doesn't have to be money. As I said, it could be just this on the CV and it adds. That's perfectly legitimate reason for taking part. So if you look at the roles, try to make them explicit. And if you actually can clarify some of these areas so that everyone has an understanding what's going on, it usually helps. And if you look just very briefly at an individual board member, they have their governance compliance. It's defined in the governance code and the rest of it, which is appended at the back of the slides here. But there are a couple of other generic things that are implied by that code. Contribution to and approval of the overall strategic direction. If you're a board member, you should be capable of contributing to the strategic direction. And actually, the board has responsibility for the approval of the strategic direction, an issue that sometimes can become a clash with the founder. The hiring, ongoing assessment, reward and termination of the managing executive, whether it be a manager, whether it be a CEO, or whatever function is the structure is taken on, that is a board responsibility. Okay, the manager can do all the hiring for the rest of the organization if that's the way it's structured, but fundamentally the key executive function reports to the board, right? The board is that person's boss, and that needs to be understood. And again, if you have a founder, this can actually create a bit of a tension in the sense that the founder has created the entity. The board wouldn't exist if the founder wasn't there. So you can sometimes end up in a position where is the founder working for the board, or is the founder steering the board to work for that? And when I mentioned earlier, in the rush to get to a board too soon, if you tend to populate it with supporters, which is what you need in the early stages, actually they will feel inhibited in actually giving you negative feedback that you sometimes need to actually hear. Each of the board members as well, you would expect them to be an advocate and part on behalf of the enterprise. It is about impact. They should be helping amplify and get the message out in the needed quarters, wherever they can be, so they should contribute positively to the overall purpose that you're after. And hopefully they contribute additional needed competencies to the overall enterprise. So for example, particularly around funding and financial stuff, it is rare enough that you'll find all the skill sets in the startup people. Trying to build all the skill set into the startup people is not a good plan. No one can be that person that can manage all of that. So, and at times you may only be needing funding. So having someone on the board that knows how to approach funding so that you actually work with them at a moment in time, that can be useful. Having someone on the board that maybe has HR experience in terms of how to deal with people, how to deal with volunteers and so on like that, that maybe not your expertise, okay, that can be a help. Having someone there that has exactly your same skill set is not actually going to be much of a help to you. It's because at the end of the day, they're not working within it, they're the board that's supervising it. And what you're looking for is complementary skills, if you can get it, to actually augment what you're doing. And if you at the other side then as a founder, like, you don't get away lightly either, you have responsibilities. And obviously the first one is execution compliant to governance. You have to operate to all the requirements that are there. You're responsible for crafting a strategic plan. In fact, one of the issues that I have about the CLG structure is, to a certain extent, it seems to favor a manager being overseen by the board and the manager not necessarily being part of the strategic direction. Personally, I find that a mad situation because the manager should understand the practical operations on the ground. So it's all very well talking about expanding, but I have seen this as an example where someone wanted to expand the program threefold, and it was in theory a good point, but in terms of the financial resources that they currently had to bear, right, there wasn't sufficient to be able to do that. You are responsible for the implementation of the approved plan, the plan approved by the board. The operational oversight of the enterprise and the organisation and development of the enterprise to match its needs. Now, you could get a whole level of detail beyond that, but we do believe in keeping it kind of fairly simple, okay? And where possible, if you make it explicit, and you can't get rid of all the grey zones, but the more grey zones you get rid of early on, the chances of unintended consequences and conflict kind of fall away a little bit. So some examples I've probably already touched in there in terms of strategic planning, where someone wants to do an expansion where they're not necessarily looking at the reality on the ground, and then you end up with the strategic plan being a complete odds with the capability of the organisation. In terms of financial control is actually quite a delicate one. I would say to any founder, the minute you have a board in place, you lay out the financial rules. So for example, a very simple thing, if you take expenses, in terms of travel expenses, if you're the founder and say you go to an event and you put diesel in the car or whatever, these green days, and you do that on a credit card or something like that, okay? If you're also the person signing that off, no one's done anything dishonest in that. But if you think about it, if you're the person that signs that off and approves that expense, all right, you're leaving yourself open to problems down the road. Okay, so for example, in my case here, I'm the CEO, I sign the expenses for all the people that work in ISBC. All my expenses have to be signed off by the chairperson. And I actually wrote the policy that way, right? And I wrote it for my own benefit, okay? So that I have due diligence over what I'm doing, okay? And so equally well, simple little thing, if I travel to an event with one of my colleagues, okay, I will pay for whatever the costs are associated with them, because otherwise it will look like I'm traveling with them, they're paying the cost and I'm signing it off. It's simple little things, but it can save an awful lot of ambiguity afterwards and protection. And most of the time when people end up in financial control bothers afterwards, it's unintended. It's just kind of a slippery slope that just looseness creates ambiguity, which causes confusion and a lot of trouble thereafter. And I mentioned earlier that founder conflict, which is actually a very difficult thing to deal with. As the founder, you can make all decisions instantaneously. But in order to get the impact you want, you have to grow the organization to be able to do that. To grow the organization, you have to build an enterprise. And the fundamental thing about it is you cannot be the dominant voice in that. If you create a board, you genuinely have to cede control to that board in an understood way. You have to understand that there are no limitations on it, that they're your boss, okay? And a lot of time, as I said, people will tend to go with boards that will do what they want. And I would say to you honestly, if you're on a board where the expectation is that you do what the founder or the chief executive says, get off the board. It's not a healthy place for you to be, and it will probably not end well. Initially, all of this can seem overpowering. Even the language is overpowering, okay? And if you go to, and in fairness to the Carmichael House, they do excellent programs in terms of actually training people in terms of direct responsibilities and people and things like that. But it actually isn't as much if you just stand back and get this part right. Clarity of purpose, so you know what you're doing. Understanding responsibilities that you have and that other people have. Transparency, again going back to the expenses approach, and plain ordinary common sense. If you do that, most of the governance course is putting in legal context an awful lot of that. But if you look at it from those basic simple principles, if you can get your head around those, you will actually be probably in pretty safe ground no matter how it follows. Yes, you have to follow all the legal responsibilities, but if you've done it that way, you should actually find out that, yeah, that's actually how it turns out we did it. And the last part of the thing that you need is in terms of real communication. And real communications or shared understanding. We could do a whole pile on this, but really it comes down to, again, shared purpose, explicit roles. You've probably heard that 1,000 times already from me so far. Listening with empathy. And that is the hardest part, I think, in this. It's actually being to listen to someone else. If you have a board member and they're taking a different position, to take a position against you, what listening with empathy means is you try to understand why they're taking that position. You don't rush to judgment. You hear about it in context. You engage with it. If that happens on both sides, things become a lot easier. And understanding the formal and informal pathways of communication between the board, the person in charge, and the rest of the organization. What you can often find is that for the managing person to actually work with the chairperson is kind of an informal working relationship. There's probably a more formal structure, there has to be a more formal structure with the full board, but like say, again, say if I'm taking my case, I would regularly touch base with the chairperson, just tell them what things are going on and so on like that. Is there minutes to that? No, they're not, but it's keeping us both in the loop as to where we actually are. And then you have the whole formal governance structure that parallels that with the full board. Equally well, I've seen examples that whereby some of the board members will go down into the organization. I've seen it where it's worked really, really well, where they're bringing a core competency that is not available in the enterprise, and that actually helps them. I've equally seen it as being almost a micromanaging and a mistrust evidence of the manager in place. So again, finding out that these things are happening in the background, finding out that someone is telling everyone to a member of a board what's going on. Actually, slightly off the wall example, but just to show on the commercial world, this also happens. There is actually a $1 billion Irish company, okay? And it has a transport leg of it. And I have actually seen their chairperson asked to explain, and it is a co-op, I have to be honest. I've seen their chairperson asked to explain by members of the co-op why such and such a truck was broken down or was in this place. The guy is running a $1 billion company, yet there's back channels working where people expect all this to work. And that actually makes it a very energy consuming approach. And the last thing is proportionate. You can overdo communications, okay? Make it proportionate to how it actually is. So if you are going to talk with your chairperson and the rest of it, ringing them every day is lunacy, okay? That just proves you're not doing what you should be doing. says not ringing them for about 2 months, not a great plan either. Okay, it's what works for you in terms of your relationship. So this is really what we're saying is the end state when you get here, okay, you're going to have these 3 entities. And as you go through the journey, what you're really trying to do is figure out how to build these 3 relationships in the best way that works for you. And this is why, even though you all start as a social enterprise, you can end up as diverse from a CLG with charity status to a limited company that has, on all appearances, a commercial format. Are there significant implications from your choice of structure? Yes, they are. Okay, especially around control and direction, market perception, business model, and funding. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through much of this. I will touch now just on the funding implication a little bit. But to give you an idea in terms of control and direction, Diarmuid already pointed out, if you're a charity, okay, and you're a paid person, okay, you can't be on the board, okay? This is an implication that comes in. So if you're the founder and you want to stay on the board to direct the strategy of that, and it is a charity status, you cannot be a paid member of the charity itself. In terms of market perception, it actually is a big deal. In limited companies, they very much think you're in for a commercial reason, and that can be an advantage at times. Because sometimes in social enterprise space, if you're a CLG and the rest of it, we talk about people leading not with the service, but leading with the charity. And that can be the right thing and it can be the wrong thing. A lot of the time we say is, you are a CLG, you provide a service, this is a service, this is the value you get from that service. And by the way, this is the impact and good that it does. Depending on your purpose and what you're trying to achieve, you have to strike a balance as to which is the appropriate way to do it. And the market perception is influenced then by, if you're a for-profit, fine, they will expect you to be leading with the service quality. If you're a charity, they will expect to be leading almost from that side. And where you sit with in between depends on your particular circumstances. And similarly, the business model in terms of what you do with the money, okay, how you handle that. Are you going to make money? There is a phrase that drives me spare, which is not for profit, is a social enterprise not for profit. There's no problem making profits. In fact, it's a bloody good thing to do, to be perfectly frank, okay? What makes a social enterprise is what happens with those, okay? So that, again, as Diarmuid would have mentioned, he talked about a DAC. In a DAC, you can actually legislate what you can do with the profits. Still a commercial company, but you have total control over what the profits actually do. In a CLG, it's locked in. The assets are locked in. On the other hand, as an example of the complexity that can come into play, suppose you're doing an environmental initiative that we came across a few years ago. It was based on land. The CLG that was created was renting the land from the founder of the thing. There was nothing illegitimate about it. It was perfectly clear. The challenge that created, though, was that the rent was being paid by the CLG to a member of the CLG. And the tenure was an issue. So one of the things we said to them is, you have to give 6 or 7 year type time frame of a rental contract from the person to the CLG. Otherwise, every year you're going to have an argument about what the rent is going to be. And that's not fair on either side. And just briefly then, before I finish, I'll just talk a little bit about funding. And I have to be honest, the summary here is funding is actually awful complicated because of this. If you take it from a community aspect, okay, there is a range of people there in terms of the partnership networks, and this is not all the people involved, Rethink Ireland, Community Finance Ireland, Clan-Credas and others. Almost all of those people have a limitation on lending beyond the CLG. They, in their charter, right, as much as they might like to, in their charter, some of those organizations cannot lend to a for-profit entity. So if you take the company route, the limited company route, you cannot get funding from there. Equally well though, if you look on the other side, in terms of the for-profit side, there's a developed set of stuff. Local Enterprise Office, which kind of sits maybe a little bit between the two, and Enterprise Ireland. Enterprise Ireland equally is similar to the community side of the funding. it cannot lend to any business that does not intend to trade internationally. So it simply cannot lend to any Irish-only based company. It's against this charter in the same way as on the community side. So if you're within a CLG and that CLG is essentially focused in the Irish geographic region, they cannot fund you. And also you have a whole range of other people then in terms of philanthropic people, impact investors. And impact investors, a funny thing, they could be, say, investing in environmental projects. They could go both to community CLGs, they could go for profit recycling companies. The same investor can actually dip in both waters and is very comfortable because their motivation is the impact that they're trying to achieve. And then you have the pure commercial venture funds and seed funds beyond that. So what you have here is this funny grey zone. And unfortunately, social enterprise fits totally into that grey zone. What we would say to people is don't get preoccupied by where the funding might appear to be at this moment in time. All right. What you need is the right funding for what you're doing and to concentrate on making sure the idea works, understand the structure that's developing, and then target your funding towards that. There is a tendency slightly that says if a fund comes up on one side or the other, let's try for that. Let's try for the next one that comes up. And that has a very, very low success rate. What you need to do is believe in your impact, see how you're going to deliver that, and argue your case for funding to the appropriate person from that. So structural choices do influence funding paths, but purpose should always guide. However, and I am nearly finished, what structure best becomes clear? When you have clarity of purpose. It sounds like a broken record, I know that. When the shape of the enterprise that comes from the idea begins to emerge. A startup in the social space or in the commercial space is an idea that you're trying to find an enterprise from. Okay, the first thing to do is prove the idea has value. And as you prove the idea has value, you'll be surprised how much that influences the structure choices that are there. So for example, to go back to the two people I mentioned at the beginning, all right? The limited company actually is because that the scope of that endeavor is actually extending beyond Ireland. Okay, so they will trade beyond this jurisdiction. So for them, it actually makes more sense to actually go with a limited company. The CLG with charity status actually reflects the origins, but also what they wanted to achieve. It was based on contributing to the good within their community, right? And from doing services as a charity, they suddenly realized that to get the full impact of this in a broader scale, it has to develop as an enterprise. So that's the route that they took. Both are totally valid, both are perfect examples of social enterprise, but they're actually quite different. And that's me done.
Eamon, thanks very much. That was most enlightening. Now, thanks to everybody who's getting all your questions and your comments and so forth. And Eamon, I might just start with you there while you're on a flow. Is it difficult to change from one chosen formation to another?
As Deirdre actually said earlier, you can go from a limited company to a CLG to a charity. It's a real awkward problem going the other way. So actually, Deirdre's answer is spot on. If you're starting off, sole trader is the easiest. There can be reasons why I would go with a limited company, which isn't a huge thing to start off. And particularly I would do that if there's a potential for liability involved in things. Sometimes that can be the lowest cost way of doing. And you can always convert into the others. But if you start as a charity, you start as a CLG, you're really going to be problematic shifting out of that. And I'd say you would agree with that, Diarmuid.
Absolutely, because your assets is locked into the charitable status. You can't just break up the company and give it to the new company starting up. So when you dissolve a charity, it has to go to another charity or go to the charity regulator, and they'll distribute any residual assets. So yeah, I think it's, as I said, think where you're going to go and keep the simple, as Eamon said, keep it simple as you start out, and don't get yourself locked into particular paths that will make it difficult for you to unwind. So I would, in the early days, simple sole trader. If you're not sure where you're going to be in terms of your own control over the enterprise as it grows, go the limited company, the private limited company route. Then, if once you've got clarity around it and you've got a model and you can see, well, to expand in this particular space, I need to go into the CLG space. You can go into that way at that stage. So it's not getting yourself locked into a particular path too early, because, as Eamon said, there was money going there and you went down this particular path. Now you find that your choices are limited later on if you want to go to a different stage of development.
Great, thanks. I think that might have covered a few of the questions. Just a few little points clarifying a number of issues along the lines of, so a CLG structure cannot pay investors back or a dividend. Yeah,
because it's a non-profit structure. There's no share capital. It's locked in to the use of the purpose of the company. So that's the difficulty with it. And that's one of the big weaknesses in the Irish legal structure, that social enterprises that could have people that might want to invest and do early stage investment, they can't get their money back out. So there's a weakness in that. So if you want to get investors involved to help you get started, then you're going down the limited company route rather than the CLG route.
And maybe just to add to that, the example I mentioned earlier about if you're, say, renting an asset from someone for a CLG, yes, you can be paid in a CLG. You can give your asset and rent it and get paid rent from that, but it's got to be managed very clearly that it's proportionate. Okay, there could be a tendency that you could sort of maybe inflate those to kind of extract it out. But if you've done that, your values are totally wrong. No.
And you get problems with the revenue commissioners very quickly as well.
Great. Now, another little just point of clarity again. Can you be a sole trader and apply for charity status? Do you have a VAT number for both?
The VAT is a separate issue, but no, to become a charity, you can be an unincorporated association, you can become limited by guarantee, or you can be a trust. You can't be a sole trader and get charity status, because it's more than one individual. Now, VAT is a particular one in charity sector. There's a misconception that you're exempt from VAT. You are exempt. There's certain exemptions, but if you are trading in a commercial basis, there is VAT. You can be subject to that. So if you take a charity shop, if they buy in product and sell it on, that's a VATable activity. So they have to be VAT registered and account for the VAT. But what a lot of the charity shops is they get the free donations and then they can sell it on, and that's not a VATable. But VAT is totally very, very complex area. So you would need to definitely get specialist advice, accountancy advice in that area if you are going into trading activity that could be subject to VAT, and you will have to register for VAT for that. You're not automatically exempt from VAT if you're a charity, but certain activities is VAT exempt. So that's why sort of understanding that is important.
Great. I hope that helps the questionee. Great. Another question: is there a conflict if a social enterprise pay operational costs, wages, etc., and the revenue after taxes is reinvested in a social enterprise?
No. That's how most of them work. Social enterprises employ people. Those people need to be paid. It's what you do with the surplus is this based on your constitution and that you've set up for yourself. If you're a private limited company, you can pay that in dividends and profits. That's okay. But if you're a charity or a company, you're going to reinvest that surplus back into the expansion of the business.
Great. On the boards, the board question, what is the recommendation around a good number for a board? And can the directors give the management of the social enterprise to a committee?
Again, you know, it depends on the scale of your business and the stage of development of your business. If you're a private limited company, you only do one director, so a board of one is the minimum you have under the Companies Act. If you're a charity, you need 3. Going beyond that depends on what value are they bringing, what skills are they're bringing to the board. You can go up to some boards that have 10, 12, 14. But again, you'd have to kind of ask yourself when it goes up to that size, why do we need that number? Are they adding value? Are they going to add to confusion or conflict? Because there might be the same clarity of purpose that Eamon was stressing may not be there as the numbers increase. So it very much depends on where your stage of development and what the role of the board is. So a board of 5, 6, 7 is fine. If they all have, they're bringing something specific to the board and have a clarity around what they do. Management committees tend to be an unincorporated organization, so you can have a management committee when you have a charity or a company limited guarantee. You have a board structure, and they are the ones that provide the direction and the control, and they are legally responsible for the actions and the activities of that entity. So they have specific legal responsibilities. So they need to be clear about it and understand that. You may have a management committee underneath it doing some operational thing. They don't necessarily have the same legal responsibilities, but people have ended up on charities, think they're on a management committee and don't realize they're actually the trustee of the charity and they have all the legal responsibilities. So you need to be clear about what is the management committee and what's the legal structure that you're operating in and where is my responsibility. And to echo Eamon's, clarity is always important. What is it I'm doing? What are my responsibilities? What authority do I have? And what are the limitations of that authority and what legal responsibilities I have? Because a lot of people have found themselves, have got involved with somebody and thinking they're there as an advisor, and suddenly they are trustees with all that responsibilities, or directors of the company without realizing it.
And just to add to that, it's very important to remember, just because you have a management committee or whatever you want to call it, just because you set that up does not devolve your responsibilities to them. If you're a trustee or whatever, you're still the trustee. That's just the way you've chosen to implement it in whatever approach that you've taken. But you're still on the hook for what it is. You haven't passed it all off in terms of, okay, we've got them as a management committee doing things now, so they're responsible for what it is. If things go wrong, you're the trustee, you're responsible. That's the fundamental requirement.
Lovely, thanks Eamon and Dermot. If when we were talking about the formation of boards, we mentioned that there's no urgency in creating one. But if the enterprise is starting to generate revenue now, is there then more urgency around creating or choosing a formation for your enterprise?
Again, I think it goes back to the other one. If the easiest way, if you're generating revenue now, which is a good thing if you're starting early that way, is you do need a structure. If you take the commercial structures, they're probably the easiest to get off the ground. And then what I would do is, as Dermot said at the very beginning, is the strategic direction you're going in. Okay, where you want to go. If you're generating profits, what do you want to do with these profits? Do you want to extract them off the business, or do you want to flow them back in? Okay, and how much control people are going to have over that. So you sometimes think that people, I've heard this before, where someone thinks that we're generating a profit here and we're doing something in terms of recycling, so we can take that out, okay, and we can go off and do another recycling thing somewhere else. Okay, if it's a limited company, you can do that. If it's a CLG, it depends on what you put into the clauses around the CLG as to what you can and can't do. Okay, and you certainly cannot take them out under your name to make those decisions. That's the CLG's money. I don't know if you'd add to that, Dermot.
Yeah, no, again, it's thinking where you go, the journey you're going to be taking over the next while. So the fact you're generating revenue now doesn't mean that you need to suddenly put in elaborate structures, but it's thinking where you're going to go in 12 months, 36 months, 5 years time, and what kind of structures you need to put in place for that. A lot of times when organizations are growing and are engaging with, getting contracts, the person giving them the contract or giving the funding will impose a type of structure on you. They'll say, we need you to have this in place. We need to see who you have around the table in terms of the board that you've got, quality of that board. Are we not going to do business with you? So sometimes that's what happens. You're running along and now you're making a big jump in terms of getting funding or getting a contract, and they want a particular structure or else they won't do business with you.
Great, thanks. Now, at this juncture, I'd just like to welcome along Annabelle. Annabelle Conway is our partner in Innovate Communities in Dublin. So it's great to see you, Annabelle, and thanks for joining us at this moment. Please feel free to jump in with anything you'd like to contribute. We'll continue with a few more questions for a moment, and we'll go from there. Two questions, I suppose, that that one could blend together maybe. Is it a really bad idea to have your friends on the board? And is there a limit on the length of time a person can serve on a board?
I'll go with that. It can be better if you want to lose friends, you put them on a board. It's not a good idea. A board has a particular role. A board member, a board director, or a trustee, whatever, has a particular role and responsibility. And they may, as Eamon said earlier, may have to tell you things you don't want to hear, but it's necessary for the business for you to hear it. Sometimes, as you expand, they outgrow the needs of the company, that they can't add the value that you need as you expand. So I would be reluctant to put on friends on the board. You have conflicts of interest then as well, and whose interest are they going to act on your interest or the interest of the business? Because legally, if you're a company that is limited by guarantee, or you have to put the interest of the company before your individual interests, and that can be difficult when you've got friends on the board, and it can hold you back as well. So the board members have to have a specific role and a value to the business, and as the business grows, they may outlive their value, and that's okay too. They might be the right people at the start, but after a certain stage, you may need to bring other people to come on. The other question that was on that was the fixed terms. That is a decision that you take. There is best practice that you put a fixed term on it, that you don't stay on, that you don't have your board members staying on forever. So, what is the ideal limit? Some said 6 years, some say 8 years, it depends, but you can make that decision yourself. Even in the Charities Governance Code, and I was one of the advisors to the regulator on that, the best practice would say put a fixed term limit on it, but they recognize there are certain circumstances where a fixed limit could cause problems for particular entities. But I would say 6 to 8 years, put that term, review it, say do a 3-year term, and then that's reviewed and say, well, you can finish now, or we'll give you a second 3-year or 4-year and a 4-year term. It does create a structure, clarity. It says, if I get involved, I know I'm there for 4 years. I know then I can step out, or I might be asked, I might be asked to do another term, but I have an 8 year. So good practice to do it, but the rules is up to each individual company to determine what's right for them. And that, Eamon, you want to add?
No, that's the truth. Like at the end of the day, if you have envisaged this situation, fundamentally, a member of the board could have to fire the founder.
Yeah.
Right? And it's bloody hard as a friend to do that.
Many years ago, when I was advising, it was a private company that typically started out in a shed in the garden, and now is a multinational company, turning over hundreds of millions. And we were brought in to look at the governance structure, and the board consisted of the local school teacher, the local banker, the local publican, 2 brothers-in-law, and it was very hard for the founder of that thing to say, guys, you're no longer adding any value to the board. We're now a multinational. We're not a small little enterprise. But so part of our job was to say, it's time to move on. So they put him onto an advisory council as a first step off the board. But it was a very difficult for them. These were the people that stuck by him when he started out and gave him the support and probably put a few bob into it. And now their value was well long by the sell-by date. So again, it's that difficulty. It might be convenient to ask these people that you know come on your board. It can also be inconvenient when you want to say goodbye to them.
And on the time frames, I think that what you want to look at as well is if all the people are of the same timeline on the board, right, the energy can fall off a bit. So you could sort of, after 4 or 5 years, and if all the same people are there all the time, the energy can fall away. Sometimes it can actually be, it just depends on how that actually works. So I'd be, just watch that there's a good mix in the board in terms of capabilities, in terms of enthusiasm, in terms of challenging thoughts, right? If you can get that, you can keep the energy up and goes on. And that's actually an indicator of the timelines, I think, as well. So.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Now, I'm conscious that we have 7 minutes left, so I would just really like to thank everyone who has contributed questions, and if there's anything that we didn't address, or the presentations when they are emailed to you tomorrow doesn't address, please feel free to get back to any of us in relation to any of that. So if I could just briefly reintroduce Annabelle. Annabelle is the Social Innovation Manager with Innovate Communities in Dublin. And this is our last event in a series of events over the past number of weeks in partnership with Innovate Communities. And it has been our absolute pleasure here in ISBC to work with Innovate. So if I just open things up to the panelists there, if you want to have your final few words before we wrap up for the evening and say our goodbyes. Don't all jump together now. Take orderly queue, please.
I'll jump in here.
Thanks, Annabelle.
The screen calls me Fiona. It's actually Annabelle. I just want to say, first of all, thank you. We have partnered with ISBC in terms of delivering these suite of supports for social enterprises, and we're based in Dublin. We're a social enterprise ourselves. We run a social innovation hub in Ballymun, where we work with the community to craft creative solutions to the needs of the communities and provide programs. And we also provide reasonably priced co-working spaces. So we do a few things. We're setting up our second social innovation hub in the Liberties later this year. And our focus moving forward is very much on helping to develop social enterprises. So this has been an absolute treat for us to be involved with the ISBC on these programs. And it's really been lovely. So thank you. And I really enjoyed this evening. Thank you all for this too.
Great, thanks, Annabelle. And we are eagerly now looking forward to our Startup Incubator programme in conjunction again with Innovate, for which the applications are open on Monday next. So keep an eye on our website, isbc.ie or innovatecommunities.ie for any more information on that. And finally, can I just reiterate my thanks and all our thanks to everybody who joined us this evening, and a special thanks to Diarmuid for your time and your expertise and your insights and knowledge, and to Eamon for the same. And thanks to everybody who attended. So looking forward to seeing you next time.